Hello, everybody. Guess who I am? I'm Waldo. Where's Waldo? Let's get my stocking cap. I'm all set. All right. I wanted to talk about your responses to Temple Grandin in that massive discussion, which I think came to 70 pages. So I'm definitely doing a video, not trying to write out written responses to everybody. Lots of good stuff. I do want to mention that I think you should watch that tape on Way Out West with the part about California English. I thought it was very funny. It had Valley Girl and Surfer Dude talk. And I think those are functioning on there. So if you want to go back and look at those, they're very good. In fact, they're funny. They even have the movie Clueless is included in there. And I find California English kind of quirky and funny. Of course, you see a lot on TV, and it does impact the way kids talk. A lot of interesting comments. First of all, Temple Grandin's a great movie. It's nice and safe, and you can share it with kids that are in elementary school, middle part, all the way up to high school or beyond. It's good for talking about bullying. I think Mike had made a remark about it. It's good stomping grounds for discussing bullying, to be a bully. I have trouble saying that with ing. So Temple Grandin teaches a lot of wonderful attitudes about how to accept others and to be patient with others and to understand what they have to offer. And then people process information and see the world very differently. And that doesn't make them any less. They're just different, as you mentioned. The squeeze machine was an interesting part of that movie. I remember that one roommate of hers thought she was some kind of pervert or something because she had a squeeze machine, when in fact, some people mention that weighted blankets are used and that it actually causes people to be comfortable. I noticed that when you get dental x-rays, they put that heavy lead thing or whatever on you, and it's kind of comforting. You're in a dental chair, sometimes kind of cold, and you feel a little anxiety, and you get the little weighted thing on you, and you feel good, but then they take it away. So, all right, a lot of words that I'm going to have to look up, and because I haven't had a chance to do these, but I noticed all through here. Very funny when Grace, you mentioned LOL and your mom thought it meant lots of love. I used LOL, and my older son, who's about in his 30s, demeaned me by saying, "You sound like a teenage girl talking on Messenger. LOL, LOL." And then I got to where I didn't use it. And then I thought LMAO could be funny. Have you ever noticed that people have used something that really has a bad word in it and they didn't realize it, and they used it very casually, and then I've noticed that on people's comments on Facebook, and they'll use some term and then a little later you say, that's really not an appropriate term to use casually in front of people that know each other on Facebook, because it's an acronym. And those can be interesting. I won't bring up what they are. Being accused, I think Kim had this, being accused in Wisconsin of having a Southern accent because you didn't say use guys. You said you guys, I think is what you mentioned. Or the word for downtown in Wisconsin is Dontone. Dontone? I noticed that with Minnesota or Wisconsin accents. It's kind of more nasal. I think it's more nasal. I don't know. I always attribute that to maybe German background, or it's hard to say. I noticed I lived in northern Missouri, and I could tell a southern Iowa accent. They just were a little more slower talking, and I would think, oh yeah, Iowa. And we probably, if you listen to me now, you'll probably say, I'm kind of a Southern accent, even though I like to think I speak Middle English, don't have an accent. See, I don't quite believe that about Nebraska being neutral and everybody wants to have a Nebraska accent. Ope. Ope was an interesting word. This came up a lot, OPE or OP. And I always thought it's kind of like only people say ope. And it's kind of like they begin a sentence, they just throw a word out there like, oh, only you say ope, which was interesting. The military word, and I don't know if Grace said this. I think, yes, she did. Something about the word booty used in the military. It was told it means uncool. The word booty has meaning for pirates. It has meaning that's probably not very nice and other vernaculars. And that's interesting. The word kiddos, I have to look these up. You can look this up on an Urban Dictionary or on a slang dictionary. I actually have a bunch of slang dictionaries, but of course they're not as good as the internet because they're always, once they're published, are outdated. Kiddos, I've heard that so often. I've heard certain people use the word kiddos. I always think it's kind of an older woman, probably in her about 50, that would say kiddos. Hey, the kiddos are going to go out and have fun, the grandkids or something. Or you kiddos, kind of a casual word. What are some other things that Annika, she had a side in her early in the discussion. She talked about disability and what they do in Sweden to help accommodate. And of course, it's a pretty, what some people call a socialist or a social welfare state. And they do a lot to help people with limitations, financially especially. And I really like reading about that. Annika. Taylor, Liz Napples. I gotta look that up. I don't know what that means. That was interesting. Kids sometimes invent their own words, like Annika, you said in Colorado, some of the seventh graders will say satisfying, like petting a dog and say satisfying. And that's kind of a thing that comes and goes. I kind of remember that in my youth, that we'd have little things we would say, but they wouldn't stick. It was just like local invented language, but it didn't persist. I really enjoyed Lisa Hines. You talk about your grandfather's accent that your boyfriend noticed and that you didn't notice, and that you still plant zucchini in his honor. That really was very touching. It's funny how you remember things like that. Another one was, this was really got me, Lisa, is instead it's raining cats and dogs. They say in South Dakota or wherever it is, it's raining pitchforks and hammer handles. I can't even imagine saying that. It just doesn't sound like it would flow off the tongue, but I guess they use it, That I like cats and dogs because I think it's more common. I know if I said pitchforks and hammer handles, that would be really different. I've never heard that before. Okay. Again, several of you talked about using the Temple Grandin movie, and I was amazed. Annika said that her husband, was it, Colorado, actually knows her and does business with Temple Grandin. And of course, she does live out there. I know that. She's a professor of animal husbandry at Colorado State University, which, well, I don't remember where it is. I know it's one of the cities right near Colorado Springs or Fort Collins, sorry. Taylor Watsky, you mentioned pecan, and I noticed that difference. Pecan versus pecan, and coyote versus coyote. A lot of people like to put that final E in there loud. I would have to actually think. I don't know how to pronounce it officially. I've heard it pronounced coyote, and coyote. Usually coyote is, is a slang. If you don't know it, it's the term used for a person who leads people across the border from Mexico to the United States. It's almost become a generic term for someone that helps smuggle people across. A coyote is kind of a lookout. Shore for sure. I say sure. Some people say sure, sure, sure. Be glad to meet you. And that could, some of these can be Appalachians, some of these can be northeastern U.S. Remember, the Appalachians run from Maine, southern Maine and New York, all the way down in the mountains into Tennessee and northern Alabama. So some of that, you get old pronunciations from the Irish or even the older settlers, and some of those persist. Kim, you had the bubbler for the water fountain. Several of you mentioned that. Now, buggy for a shopping cart. When I think buggy, I think Amish riding in a buggy. I never think of buggy except as something old, you know, two-wheel or maybe a four-wheel thing that you put horses on and you ride around, and only Amish use them anymore. And Cassie, you mentioned that they said in sickness and in health instead of in health. It's almost a funny joke there. Carrie, now this is a big one. And if you can, this is almost a way to tell what region people are from. Pop versus soda versus, I've heard sody. I've heard sody pop. And some people call it a Coke. And when they say Coke, and then you say, I want an orange Coke. And so I guess a Coke can mean any soft drink, because Coke becomes generic, just like the word Jeep became generic for a vehicle, a type of vehicle, when you're always reminded that Jeep is the copyright or trademark of a certain company, Jeep. Aunt versus aunt. I say aunt, but I've heard aunt. And I've heard in African-American English, aunt is used. And that is actually consistent, I think, with the old proper English pronunciation, aunt. Your Aunt Clara is here. And it always is interesting. You think some people use slang, but some may use a word that harkens back to the original pronunciation. Aunt is kind of a very folksy, you know, Aunt Betty's here. You betcha. I remember that from Fargo, and even from people that I knew from Iowa, they would say, you betcha, you betcha. You know, and if you say it quickly and people aren't expecting it, they're not going to know what you're saying. You betcha. Or you betcha bottom dollar. You know, bottom dollar, what would that be? Well, I guess that would be in your pocket. I think that's from the old days, the Southern days, or the country days, or the cowboy days. The movie Fargo is really good. So Becky, you brought that up. I'm very familiar with that term. You ever watch the movie Fargo, the original, from early 1990s? It's kind of a violent movie. It's not a kid movie, but it's very funny with the way people talk and the way people act. So it's Fargo and Minnesota accents. Cassie, you mentioned, why are British accents so attractive? And that's interesting. There's actually a website where a lady gives accents of different places in Britain, in Northern Ireland, and even the Irish and a few others, but mainly it's places in England. And of course, I always kind of perk up when I hear a British accent. It's very attractive to me, but not the lower class, like if you ever seen My Fair Lady, and she's has a Cockney accent. And I won't try to imitate it because I don't remember it well, but it's a very working class street English. It's not pretty. It's not like you hear in Parliament when people talk. But I've always thought it was a very attractive accent. Of course, I like French, and so if someone speaks in French and even speaks to the French accent, I perk up. I say, oh, interesting. Now, Kim and Micah were talking. Micah, hope I'm saying her Micah. The Andy Griffith Show, and this is interesting. I was thinking how popular TV shows are played over and over and over on TV that impact us. And I remember All in the Family had a lot of stuff back in the 70s. If you don't know what it is, it's Archie Bunker. And it's kind of the first really breakthrough family time show that was a little more serious, but still comedic. It dealt with all kinds of issues: sexual orientation, discrimination, racism, political conflict. But Archie Bunker was a guy that lived in Jersey, or I think thereabouts, and he had a Jersey accent, and he had a hippie son-in-law, and he had a daughter, and his wife was very kind of put up with him, and he was kind of demeaning to her. It wouldn't be allowed now, but at that time it was thought to be funny. But the show Andy Griffith Show, which I watched when I was 6 years old, really impacted me. I saw it. I felt it was a moral compass. It taught me a lot of good things about, I remember episodes about people being accused of stuff and they were innocent, and it turned out that in the end of the show, they apologized and they made, in other words, things turned out well, but people were ashamed at first. And then I remember one that really influenced me is Opie, the little boy. He accidentally or intentionally killed the mother of a bunch of birds in a nest, and they were up there starving. And he went and got them, put them in a bird cage, and raised them. And then it came time at the end of the show, he had to let them go because they had grown up. And it actually made me cry. I was a little kid, and I said, he had to let the birdies go. They were his pets. But then his dad, Andy Griffith, said, but the trees are certainly a lot more beautiful, and you can hear them singing. And so it kind of taught you about respect for life, for animals, and respect for truth, and respect for other people, and don't be a braggart, and don't lie. And a lot of good moral truths were in there. And but that show had Southern accents. And I can tell you right now, Andy Griffith was from North Carolina. He used North Carolina accent. He was a comedian. And then they had people come in and they had the accent too, more or less. Barney Fife really didn't, but he played his assistant. If you don't know Andy Griffith, then it's not going to work, but you almost can't avoid it. You must have seen it sometime because it'll be on forever. And Gomer, and I remember the Darlings, who are a kind of bunch of hillbilly people, live out in the country that were always trying to marry their daughter off to Andy Griffith, and they had a guy named Ernest T. Bass, who was only on the show twice, but people know him forever. He's an icon in television history, and he was kind of a crazy guy that lived out in the woods and didn't know how to speak correctly, and he tried to learn to speak, and they tried to straighten him out. But the show had a lot of impact, and it made people very empathetic, I think, toward those with a Southern accent, because they thought they were nice people, I noticed, because when I was reading, and some of you have gone through the South, Mississippi, and you said, well, the people started talking to me. I didn't know what they were saying. It was English. Y'all very happy. Y'all welcome to our restaurant. I can pretend to speak South. I don't speak a true accent because I grew up in a different place, but I have some of the words. Lisa, you made a comment about that I thought was very valuable. You said about a Japanese accountant who worked in a business in town, and he was kind of the only Japanese guy there, and he had an accent, Japanese accent. And if people would take the time to listen to him, they could understand him. A lot of people stop and they say, I don't understand you, you have an accent. But they're speaking English. If you take the time, you can understand them. You have to just teach yourself a little patience, okay? The same when you have people with speech defects, because this is brought up, or disability, whatever, is if you take time to listen, you understand. You know, an example is very famous is Stephen Hawking. Remember the guy in the wheelchair that was a famous scientist, and he passed away this past year or two. And he had an electronic voice he used. I am pleased to meet you, you know, that thing, it was electronic. But he used to speak. And when he would speak, he eventually lost control of his vocal mechanism and he pretty much lost it all. But he had an assistant that could still understand him and would kind of translate while they were in conferences when people would talk to him. He could understand the question, but his voice was couldn't be understood. It was very, very difficult to understand him. So it wasn't an accent, it was a disability. But he still had people who could understand what he was saying and knew his tendencies and could interpret. And so it was really interesting. You could still hear him say a few things, and it was just sounds like weird utterances. Taylor W., you mentioned, interesting thing. You mentioned, I think you mentioned, or somebody did, the word savage used by a seventh grader. It meant to roast other students or to criticize them or make fun of them. And that really kind of goes back to the word savage. To savage someone is to kind of obliterate them, you know, to really criticize them. So I thought that was interesting. Sometimes words come back to their original meaning and kids use them correctly in a slang. You also mentioned your Jamaican friend. I thought it was interesting because when we encounter people with an accent, we tend to be a little standoffish because they're a little embarrassed. You know, you don't want to go up and say, what? What did you say? And of course, unless somebody speaks Spanish, I have to have them repeat it because my Spanish isn't very good. But then I'm the one that's at fault. I say, lo siento, no entiendo. And then so I'll say, I don't understand. Could you, por favor, repita? And then now that I'm a slightly older, I'll say, I have a problem with my ear, you know. And I thought it was Amanda Worth. You said that you were corrected that farmers are not ranchers. And where you came from, this is really interesting. This gets in the whole farmer rancher thing. And I always thought it was odd when people did rodeo stuff and they're from Missouri. I said, they're from Missouri. How could they be an Alabama rodeo cowboy? How could, you know, you got at least be from Oklahoma to be a cowboy, right? But obviously it's in your mind whether you're a cowboy. So you could be a Louisiana or a New York cowboy, I guess. But I always thought there was a line. Cowboys are west of Kansas City. That's what it said in Oklahoma, you know, the musical. Everything's up to date in Kansas City because all the Okies and all the Westerners always went to Kansas City to find out what's going on in back east. The whole concept of west and east was interesting there. I did think that I just talking to somebody on not in our class, but a new student I may be getting, and they live in Mullen or thereabouts in western Nebraska, and I started thinking about that. People in Omaha think Kearney. When kids come out here to Kearney to school, they're going back. They're going out west. Like it's almost as if there's Omaha, Lincoln, and then a huge distance, and then you're in Los Angeles, or I guess Denver maybe is in the middle. That's about it. You know, there is no Kearney, there is no Grand Island. You know, Grand Island. I always thought, how did they get that name? You know, there's no oceans out there. I thought it was Long Island, not Grand Island. But things like this are just funny with our speech and concepts we get. Anyhow, anything west is west. And so I think I always think anything west of Lexington is really out west. And then I guess people further out west, I wonder where the east starts. I mean, where do you say going back east? That's a concept in America, you know, the south, the north, the east, and the west. And then you got the southwest. You know, these are geographically, they may be definitions, but psychologically, we have different impressions about them. I never think of Iowa as being out west. Even Western Iowa is east, if you know what I mean. It's kind of games we play with language. anyhow, I just want to thank you. I really got a lot out of this. I hope this video is helpful. I love looking at these discussions and then doing what I'm doing here, because this is so much more interesting than trying to just send little notes back to each one of you. But if you ever have extra questions, be sure to send them, and then I'll be more than happy to call you up even, because I like to talk. I like to talk on the phone. And I can do that. So I'm sure you're all busy, and I'm busy, and we're all busy. Hope everybody had a nice Valentine's. If you had a face-to-face class, you would have gotten popcorn and chocolate and all kinds of goodies. But I just have to show them to you. Well, the candy's put away. But anyhow, I'm going to go back and work on something else. It's apparently snowing outside between Lexington and here, and I got to make sure I can drive home. I will put up the homework for tomorrow, and I may do video tomorrow. We'll see. Thank you.